So, continuing our look at major industries, we turn to a presentation about travel and tourism, and to present the condition and outlook for the travel industry in Montana, I would like to introduce the Director of the Institute for Tourism and Recreation Research in the College of Forestry and Conservation at the University of Montana. Would you please welcome Norma Nickerson? Excuse me, Norma.
Good morning. I'm going to start a little differently here, so hang on.
You know Montana. It's a straight-up know-your-neighbor Main Street kind of place. And the landscape, well, isn't that reason number one we live here? Yet despite all the growth over the years, our neck of the woods is still one of the only places where you can spot a grizz, run into a guy named Rip, and go fishing before work. Yeah, some might say we have everything going for us, except for one thing. Sometimes it feels like we're all reading a different chapter from the same book. Therein lies the importance of having a cohesive brand. Because whether you're a fifth-generation rancher, a sous chef with a master's, or just part of the ski rack toting outdoorsy bunch, if we're all on the same page, we can accomplish so much more. So, with our best foot forward, let's define what we are. Montana is a collection of the world's greatest mountains and prairies, coming together to create more spectacular, unspoiled nature than anywhere else in the lower 48. Montana is a combination of sidewalk squares next to diners with amazing homemade milkshakes, in vibrant and charming small towns that serve as gateways to our natural wonders. Montana is a storied place filled with wild trout streams, made famous by authors who witnessed breathtaking experiences by day and relaxing hospitality by night. Ultimately, the power to create economic success for this fine state rests in the same place it always has, in our own hands. When we combine our efforts, we better ensure the viability of Montana's economic success, its $3 billion tourism industry, and the preservation of this place.
Well, I can't take credit for that. The Office of Tourism put that together. But I wanted to show that to you because it applies to all businesses in the state of Montana. If we take care of our natural resources, people want to live here, that would be us. People want to work here, that would be us, and people want to visit. And so that's sort of the message behind here on that video for everyone. And I want to talk about people wanting to be here and people wanting to visit. Visitors like it here. They like our scenic vistas. They like our outdoors in which they can play in, all sorts of public areas that they can play. They like to watch our wildlife. And they actually do like our shopping, believe it or not, more along the High Line and down from Alberta than anywhere else. But all of Montana has shopping, and they're coming here for that, recreational type shopping. But we know they like our brand. And that brand, as stated in the video, brings those people back year after year. 84% of the people who came to Montana the first 3 quarters of this year, or 2013, said they will be back in 2 years. They will be back. So what about those numbers? Well, you hear this, and it keeps growing. It's a nice, slow growth. But in 2013, our preliminary numbers show that just a fraction over 11 million visitors came to the state of Montana, which is 2% over 2012. They drop in our state from their pocket into the pockets of everyone in this state, $3.5 billion in direct spending. And that spending is related, obviously, to the jobs. There are direct 30,630 jobs that are created because of these people coming into Montana. And those people then are spending their money elsewhere and creating more jobs, a total of 44,000 jobs. These jobs, while they're not all full-time jobs, they create the part-time, the seasonal jobs that a lot of folks want to have for their particular lifestyle. Whether it's a college student, somebody who wants just part-time, whatever it might be, these are important jobs for the whole economy. And that's one thing that the tourism industry does contribute. There's also the very high-paying jobs in the industry, but it's not all of them that way. So the spending is what's creating this good circle of economic impact. And what's interesting, what our preliminary numbers are showing for 2013, is that spending was up so far in every single quarter. Quarter one, it was up 4%. Quarter two, it was up 5%. In quarter three, and this is kind of astounding, but a 20% increase in vacationer spending in quarter three. And what that is telling us is that they are spending more, and it seems like on the higher items. It might be that outfitter guide trip. It might be a little bit, not just a souvenir, but a nice classy painting or artwork or something like that. They're starting to spend a lot more. You, us, me, we love it here as well. And in the past year, we had conducted a study for state parks, Montana state parks. And we looked at what are the facilities, the outdoor facilities that people in the state are using. And what's interesting is, and this is throughout the state, we kind of know this in Missoula, but it's everywhere, that walking, jogging, and biking trails, as well as hiking trails, top the list in the numbers of people who actually use these types of facilities. And then they're using the picnic areas or going to historic sites and that sort of thing, campgrounds, the ones without hookups. We like that primitive style, apparently. But the point is that we, as residents of this state, identify with our outdoor recreational opportunities. And you can see that, and I'll show this slide here in a minute, that we will spend our money in that way too. So $210 million spent in outdoor recreation trips, at least 50 miles or more away from home, 4.2 million person trips that are out there. The fun thing about this is that 88% of all these folks, and these were 18 years and older, said that they did participate in outdoor recreation in the previous year. And 95% of all the survey respondents said that outdoor recreation is important to their quality of life in Montana. So they're here because they like it. In this slide, you've seen these stickers around Get Lost in Montana. The Office of Tourism put this out originally to get all of us to stick around Montana, play, and do our fun stuff in Montana. And it's got a nice little, what's the word? Underneath lining of that, get lost, and if you will put it on your bumper sticker and whatnot, the non-residents might think, oh, I'm being told to get lost, but then it says in Montana. So we all think that's kind of funny. But it is. It's a good hint to everybody is to get yourself lost here, because what happens when you get lost, you do spend a lot more money. So we got asked numerous times, what did the government shutdown do to Montana and the non-resident or the travel industry in the state? When you look at some of the indicators, obviously there was a historic drop in national park visitation in October of 2013 compared to 2012 October, and that's what these bullets are saying is the 2 Octobers. Airport deboardings were down 6%, Amtrak ridership was down 7%, rooms sold were down 5% in that October compared to the October previous. One thing that we do look at, and I'd already mentioned national parks, so let's look at that one briefly. So Glacier, even though we had a shutdown, was actually up 1.3% for the full year. Yellowstone was down 7.2%, and some people might say, well, that is because of the government shutdown, but actually what happened is they collected more data. They don't do it on a very regular basis, and they were able to see that the numbers, basically the number of people in the cars went down a little bit. So there might be just as many cars coming into Yellowstone, but fewer people within the car. So when you add it all up, there was a 7% drop in the total number of people. It's a fine little thing that we do, and economists do it a lot, is when you model changes, it all of a sudden doesn't look good, but when you look at what the reason is behind it, it's probably been going down over the years, and so it probably shouldn't show a huge drop like that. The big picture that I see right now is in the airport deboardings. around the state, and we actually had a 2% decrease overall in the state of Montana. But that comes with a caveat, and that caveat is the Billings Airport was closed for 6 consecutive weekends in July and August, which is the busiest time of the year for any airport in Montana. And they were closed for construction, maintenance, and that sort of thing. So what that did is now Bozeman is standing up at the top going, we are the #1 airport in the state of Montana because they outdid Billings, looking like it for the full year. Whether that holds out or not, I'm not sure. And when we were in Helena, Meg O'Leary, the Department of Commerce director, told me that Bozeman just got another direct flight from Houston to Bozeman for the summer months, and I don't know if that's 4 months or what it's going to be. But the point is Bozeman has been very good at getting more and more flights coming in. And the third quarter of the airports, of all the deboardings, Bozeman has now for the 4th year in a row been the highest and the busiest airport in the state of Montana. So what about Missoula and the county of Missoula? What are these non-residents doing here? What are they spending? Well, almost $259 million are dropped in Missoula County alone just by non-residents from outside this state, coming in, passing through, staying the night, doing all these wonderful things that we have in Missoula. And in the travel region, Glacier Country is where Missoula is in. It makes up 36% of all the spending in the travel region comes right here in Missoula County. So quickly, what's going to happen in 2014? Well, we do our survey every year of all the travel businesses around the state, and 57% of them said they expect an increase for 2014, and some of them as much as 10%. Enough of them that I put it up there that, wow, some people are really, really optimistic. Only 4% of all the business owners said that they expect a decrease. That says 96% of the business owners around the state who have any relationship to tourism are expecting a very good year. Nationally, they're indicating that it should be about a 2% growth in domestic travel and 5% growth in international travel. International keeps going up, and I think it will keep doing that as long as our dollar is not as strong as, like right now, the euro is almost 2 to 1. So if you're going to Europe, you're going to spend twice as much as you would have here in the United States. But what else is driving some of these increases that are going on? Increases in retired people. 10,000 people a day for the next 17 years are supposedly retiring, unless they're Paul Polson and Chuck Keegan, and then they don't quite know how to do that. But the rest of them are actually retiring. Outdoor recreation participation. The Outdoor Industry Association is doing studies, and they identified the top 5 activities that are going on that people around the country are doing. And when you listen to this list, you can see that Montana bodes very well in terms of these activities: running, jogging, and trail running, fishing, road biking, mountain biking, BMX, car and RV camping, and hiking. Those are the most popular activities around the nation, and guess what? Montana has a lot for those people to do in those activities in this state. And then, as I mentioned earlier, 84% of the people in the first 3 quarters said that they were going to come back to Montana in the next 2 years. When you look at that a little bit further, about 41% of those, 40% of those people are around our nearby states and provinces. That means that 60% of these folks are coming from a further distance. And many times when they come a further distance away, they spend a little bit more time here than those who are nearby who might just spend the weekend. So we're seeing that they're coming further, they're going to come here to recreate on their vacation, they're going to spend their money in Montana, and so we're looking at 2014 to be a very good year. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Yes, I'm interested in if you know what county in Montana is showing the greatest growth in non-resident travel.
The greatest growth. Well, I'll tell you right now that the one that gets the most growth and probably therefore is going to be the higher growth factor is Gallatin. Gallatin is by far the biggest one, and Yellowstone is the draw. But they also have the winter activity that a lot of the other counties around this state do not have, which is the well-known resorts.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Norma, Missoula is working hard to improve our air service with a revenue guarantee fund, and I know other communities in the state have done that as well, including Bozeman, and I know the Flathead is looking at that. There's no single bigger factor that can affect our economy, we believe, than improving air service. And I'm just wondering, what is the state of Montana doing to help improve air service to Montana? Not only to outside markets, but within the state.
That's a great question. I wish I had a good answer for that, but unfortunately I don't, because I don't know exactly what the state of Montana is doing about it. They are aware, and I know the Department of Commerce is very aware that air service to this state can be a big factor in business development, as well as, for all of us, and it makes our lives a lot better. The airlines can choose where they want to go, and it's tough. And as long as, and that's why, you bring up the revenue, saying that we will assure that these airlines will get the revenue. That's how Bozeman has been so successful. It started with Big Sky Resort way back when, and I'm not sure which, it wasn't even Chicago. It was one of the other areas that they didn't have direct service to, and they started doing that. And the Big Sky Resort has never had to pay a dime, because as soon as that air service came into Bozeman, they filled up. And so that's always a gamble, and it is one way to look at it. And if, in terms of economic development, if there's money to gamble with, that might be one area that you could do that, but you'd have to do it for a few years to make sure that everybody around here and around the country who might want to come here know that that's going to be a place for them to go direct flights. If we can't get the direct flights, it's a diminishing return. For whatever reason, people don't want to switch planes, and that's the hard thing. Okay.
Hi, thanks for your work. Beautiful video. I have a quick comment and a question. The comment is, I love the video, and I didn't notice women in the images, only men. And it seems like half of us are paying taxes to produce that, and we want women to come and visit. So women are important decision makers as consumers and as tourists. I also have seen some preliminary results about how our tourists in Montana are, have this understandably a really rich appreciation of the nature here and the relationship, the outdoor activities, as you mentioned, and they find it dissonant when we don't have strong recycling programs. And I'm wondering if you have any information to share about that.
The only information I have is you're absolutely correct. That we get that on our surveys, that where is the recycling? And until we can figure it out from we are a rural state, and the fact that Target has to take our glass to Oregon for us, thank you very much, Bryce, is something that says that we are not there yet, and I'm not sure how to fix that unless, again, the state says this is a priority, and somehow we'd have to put some monies into it, and I don't see that happening. And I appreciate your comment about the women. I will pass that on to the Office of Tourism. Thank you.
Thank you, Norma. Norma is with us for the rest of the day, and obviously she's in town, so feel free to contact her if you have more questions or discussion. We want to turn now to a look at another major industry in Montana, and that is agriculture. And to speak to us about agriculture today, we have a professor and extension specialist in the Department of Agricultural Economics and Economics at Montana State University. Would you please welcome George Haynes?
Okay, thanks a lot, Chuck. It's always great to come back to Missoula. I actually have an undergraduate degree from the University of Montana, so it's always fun to come back here. Really important sector that's happening in Missoula in terms of agriculture these days is the growth of CSAs, community support agriculture, and kind of the organic, locally grown movement here. This is really the hub of Montana movement on those particular issues. It still isn't a very large part of what goes on in commercial agriculture in Montana, but a really rapid growth area here. In fact, we're going to begin doing programs here in March to take a look at these producers up here, and then look at the products that they sell in this market as well as outside the Missoula market, to get a better handle on kind of what the financial and economic parts of that might be. In terms of Montana agriculture more in general, Montana agriculture and Montana farmers and ranchers have once again missed the recession. 2007 to 2013 have been really remarkable years here in Montana agriculture, as well as throughout the U.S. That said, we have a challenge in agriculture here, and I think that is to see some job growth. There's not going to be any job growth in commercial agriculture as we have it currently, because the farms and ranches have gotten much bigger. They're much more technologically efficient. They're just not. It's just a different environment there. We train a lot of proprietors at Montana State University. We really don't train very many people to actually go work in agriculture because there aren't very many jobs, at least in the production piece of that. And of course, in the supporting parts of that, there are many opportunities there. So we're looking for we're looking at value added. We're looking at Europe and Great Falls, for example. It processes 40% of Montana's barley now and sell it to all these microbrewers and other people. Pasta Montana that's there. Of course, you have Country Pasta that's over here in the western part of the state. We have Wheat Montana down here in our neck of the woods in Bozeman. So we're putting a lot of emphasis on what we're doing in our department on diversification and value added these days. So what's happened in this agricultural economy in Montana this year? Well, the grains market has really been quite interesting. Prices are down in this slide. I say 15%. Actually, they're down over 20% as we stand here today. And heading south, it looks to me like production in Montana was really good this year. We started off in May and June thinking we're going to have a drought here. Turned out we had 6 or 7 inches of rain throughout eastern Montana and had really a bumper crop here in many ways, with most of our production up. Winter wheat was down a little bit, but that was just a crop rotation issue. Oh, let me slip back on the cattle side of it, and I'll talk a lot about this in just a few minutes, but boy, the cattle producers here, if you know any ranchers around the area here, they're doing very well these days, and we'll talk about the reasons for that. In the U.S., in Montana right now, we're about a $4 billion business. We've grown about 1 or 2% probably over the last year. Nationwide, the figures are really quite remarkable. This is the biggest agricultural year in the United States since 1973. And we were up probably about 6%. I don't think these numbers are going to hold as we get further into the marketing year because we're seeing such a large decline in corn and grain prices, wheat prices primarily here in Montana. So there'll be some adjustments in these, but we're still going to see likely a record year in U.S. agriculture. On the balance sheet side of it, getting away from the income statement piece of this, farms and ranches are still doing very well. Land prices are a lot of this story. Land prices U.S.-wide are still going up at about a clip of around 11% or so. In Montana, they're increasing a little less than 4%. We'll talk a little bit about why that is in just a minute. But there's the farm balance sheet at the long and short of it is doing very well. A 10% debt-to-asset ratio. For those of you that own businesses here, you know the importance of that. So what's the big concern in agriculture? Well, the big story is uncertainty. And this is a map of this storm that blew through South Dakota that all of you read about. They thought there were 100,000 cattle killed in this. What turned out there's around 10,000 probably. But this is what these producers live with, is all of this uncertainty, and a lot of it is weather-related uncertainty. This is 2012, and we had all this weather uncertainty in the Midwest. Keep in mind, it looks pretty good up in Montana. One little red spot up there indicating some drought. We got into 2000, into this past year, and all of a sudden the drought went away, but we had a huge impact of something happening in the Midwest because we were so moist. All of a sudden we had this huge corn crop that came off. It's at historical levels of corn, and of course, that is one of the reasons that our grain prices have been driven so far down here. It's been important for our cattle people because now they have cheaper feed sources here, but boy, for our grains people, it's really hit them pretty hard. As we look further into this year, look at what's going on over in the far western part of the United States, California. We think, well, California agriculture doesn't impact us because we don't produce walnuts and pistachios here, but we do produce things like cattle and hay, and the hay, it's going to influence our hay people because we're going to now be exporting more hay to California. In fact, on the cattle side, I heard a story just a couple days ago of 4,000 or 5,000 head of cattle that came to Montana from California because of the drought. So we've been very lucky here in Montana that we haven't experienced these major weather events that have had huge impacts on the amount of revenue that we've been able to generate in Montana agriculture. In 2012, we were relatively dry across the southern part of the state, impacted some of our producers there, but really not our irrigated producers. As we went into this particular year, we only had one little piece down the far western part of the state that was relatively dry, so very good moisture conditions here. As we sit here in January, we're not complaining about too little moisture. We're a little bit concerned about having too much. In the eastern part of the state, where and as you look in the blue marks there, there's we're actually a little bit more moist than we prefer to be. Okay, let's take a look at the crop side very quickly here. We export U.S.-wide about 50% of the grain that we produce. That's corn and wheat primarily. That number doesn't change too much from one year to the next, although you'll see that we're up a little bit over a year ago. One of the interesting stories is always, well, what's going on throughout the world, because we really dance on an international stage when you talk about the grains. And you'll notice if you look down this list, everybody increased their production, really with the exception of the United States. Why is that happening? Well, one of the major reasons is that wheat is not a GMO crop. We do not have genetically modified wheat that we sell. We will one of these days, but we don't right now. And so all producers that are able to switch off to GMO products are doing that because the yield enhancements are so large that they can't, they want to take advantage of that. So what we've had in the U.S. is a switching out of wheat and into other things where there's genetically modified seeds are available to you, which produce much higher yields. Wheat exports for the state of Montana, we export somewhere between 75 and 80% of our wheat. As you've noticed over the last couple of years, we've built all these big shuttle loaders here in Montana because people want to buy our high protein, very high quality wheat that we sell here, most of it going to Asia. Grain production, as I started off at the very beginning, is up a little bit. We've just had, it's kind of a normal year for us in many ways with spring wheat production up, winter wheat production down just a bit, and then our barley production, being relatively stable, a little bit less important in some ways. Grain prices, though, are the story, and boy, are these grain producers worried about this because they've been on a downward trend now for some time. They're moving down for a while here, about 4 or 5% a week. That gets people's attention very quickly. You can see all these are moving downward. I didn't show quite as large a barley decline as Pat did in his slides, but that's because this factors in malting barley here, which is a big deal for Montana producers, both the northern and southern parts of the state. Hay production, a big story for us, become a much bigger story more recently because hay has become so valuable. Hay prices are trending down just a little bit this year, but that's not going to be for long. We're looking at this drought that's going on in California right now. Hay prices, even as I stand here today, are being bid up a little bit as we're looking at shipping hay to California. It goes to California, by the way, and a lot of it ends up getting compressed and then shipped off to Asia. We have big customers. Japan's our biggest customer. China's coming on board, and we ship a lot to the United Arab Emirates as well. One of the big stories in Montana this year has been pulse production. Look at this dry pea yield numbers here. We have just had a very substantial increase. In fact, we plant 500,000 acres of dry peas in Montana now, or of pulse crops in general, but dry peas being the major component of that. We plant about 5 million acres of all of our crops, so a very substantial piece of what's going on in Montana agriculture and growing very rapidly. And a very important piece of this is that the land that the dry peas are going into was really fallowed before, so it has brought a lot of additional income into the agricultural sector, especially up in northeastern Montana, but it's now spreading really throughout most of the state where people are using it to fix a little nitrogen for themselves. Pulse prices, lentil prices have come down some. Pulse prices for dry peas have been relatively stable, but moving up as over the last couple of years. The futures price story is really the big one here. Look at the corn prices on the bottom of this. We look at Montana grain is always going to follow corn, even as much as we like to think, well, why does that really matter? We don't even grow much corn here in Montana, but corn at some level is a substitute for wheat. Those corn prices are off about 44%. We think that our grain prices will approach it. They're off now about 36% from a year ago if you look at futures prices. So a lot of concern in the grain complex there about where we're going to end up with as these prices trend lower. So really we're positive on the production side. We have a very good winter wheat crop that's being grown out there. Of course, everybody's watching these corn prices. So we're a little less optimistic on the price side. Probably the biggest news on the farm sector in the last couple of days here is we now have a farm bill. Of course, we as agricultural economists are thrilled because it's a Job Security Act for us, because we're really not good for much else other than analyzing the farm bill. So this is coming online. Just the long and the short of that in a couple sentences, what we're moving away from is price support programs and into insurance. That's really the Farm Bill. There's another component to that that Max Baucus has a stamp on, and that is that we now have permanent disaster programs rather than ad hoc disaster programs that are available. So that's kind of the long and the short of it. You'll hear a lot more about it, of course, over the next few weeks as the Senate finally passes the final version of that. So let's talk about cattle just a little bit. If you know the cattle ranchers that are around, they ought to have a big smile on their face because the cattle markets are very good these days, and I think only going to get better. The number of cows in the U.S., I don't know if many of you drive up and down the highway like I do counting cattle, but at any rate, there are fewer cattle in the United States today than there were in 1951. But beef production levels have remained relatively constant. Look at the red line that's across here. That's what beef production looks like. And that's what you get with, well, just changes in practices as well as a lot of new technology. You end up with production has remained relatively stable, even though cattle numbers have declined, now below about 88 million US-wide. The export market in beef has not been as important as in the grains. We only export about 10% of what we produce on the beef side of the house. But boy, is there a lot of potential out there now. We've seen Japan has increased their purchases from us almost 30% this year because they're now willing to take cattle that are a little bit older. We're looking at a lot of other countries that have a lot of interest, Russia being one of them, in importing U.S. beef. So we may see those numbers move some, although the USDA is not predicting that for 2014. They think they're going to remain relatively stable to maybe declining just a bit. The people that are buying our beef, of course, our big customers, Japan, Canada remains really important to us, as does Mexico. People are relatively close to us, with the exception of Japan. With some new trading agreements, in the Pacific, I think that we may see these numbers also move up a little bit because of that. The demand side is a big question, though, for these producers that are out there, and I think that if you look at this, you can see what's happened. It's the red on the bottom of this slide tells you what's happened with beef. And you'll notice that beef consumption has been on a really relatively long decline, relatively slow. We now consume about 50 pounds of beef per capita. The problem in the beef sector, though, from the producer point of view right now is one of they're worried about what's happening with retail margin. If you go into the stores and buy beef, you'll notice it's changed some, but not a great deal, because a lot of grocery stores are treating it as a loss leader at the moment. And we're afraid in the beef sector that they're going to get tired of treating it as a loss leader here pretty soon, and beef prices are going to begin to increase. Keep in mind that between January 5th and the 24th of January, beef prices, box beef prices went up by 15% just over that period of time. You didn't see that at the market. So one of the really important things out there in the beef demand side. The cattle herd piece of this has remained relatively stable in Montana. We have about 2.6 million cattle that are here. Calf prices are just off the charts. I put this chart together in, originally in October, based on USDA data. I was visiting with a bunch of ranchers when I've been up in Great Falls and Helena, and their calf prices are right about $2.50 a pound right now. I don't know where that is on that graph that's there, but it's a long ways above the line. They're actually bringing in cattle from California at about $1 a pound less than that to fatten them here in Montana. So some really interesting dynamics that are going in the cattle market these days. But boy, are these cow-calf people very happy. And it's a very important sector, by the way, to be in. There's news this morning of another packing plant closing down in Texas. The cattle feeders have been losing money. They lost money up till about September of October of last year. So our cow-calf guys are right there. They're the people that really have done very well in this market. In fact, done better than any other part of the beef sector has done. Futures prices, I can summarize these in about one sentence, but they're up about 15% over a year ago, and boy, are people optimistic. We're not going to see the cattle herd's not going to get any bigger, I don't think, for probably a couple of years. These prices are certainly going to hold, and I think maybe move a little bit higher. So what are they thinking about? Well, as I said, I'm very optimistic about what's going on here. Uncertainty is really the name of the game. Demand is what is really on everybody's mind, and it's on probably your mind as a consumer as well, because the focus has really changed to source verification. You're going to hear a lot about that, and you're going to find country of origin labeling being very popular topics this year in the popular press, even because now there's a big push. Costco, Walmart, all the major retailers have told the beef sector and, well, agriculture in general, if you don't want to source verify, we're not going to buy your products. And so in the Japanese and in other importers of our products have done exactly the same thing. They say, that's fine, if you don't want to source verify, we're just not going to buy what you have to sell. So going to be a big discussion about that. We're working with our producers in Montana right now about what they need to do to be able to source verify and follow the kind of the rules of the game that aren't coming down, by the way, from the federal government. They're coming from the market. And people will respond to what goes on in the market. Other issues that are there, of course, we can always go on to the topics that Pat and Paula talked to you about, all these other demand issues with global market conditions, as well as what goes on with tax and regulatory policy here in the United States. So in a nutshell, we're pretty optimistic, as I've been. I think every year I've talked about agriculture here. It's been really a very good run for them. I think that we're a little bit concerned on the grain side that run may be mitigated by this changes, this relatively rapid decline in prices, and we look, of course, all depends what the weather looks like, but probably prices stabilizing somewhere around this $6 figure for these grain producers. I think that the main issue is in agriculture is this whole concern just about uncertainty and where we happen to land with the major component of that, and that is what weather conditions happen to be here as well as throughout the world. We dance on an international stage when we talk about ag. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that anybody might have.
Questions for George? Comments? Oh, we have one.
Mentioned at the very beginning the CSAs being very important, local products, local meats. Do you see the state getting with this program and kind of looking at their regulations, which are very damaging to local growers and local producers?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that question. I think that you have addressed a really important issue. I think that for those of you that are interested in the organic and locally grown markets, the one piece of legislation you need to go read is the Food Modernization Act. There's some provisions in that Senator Tester put into that legislation that allows for small producers to still be able to sell their products without incurring some of the compliance costs that are incurred when you have to comply with Food Modernization Act. It's a really critical issue as you think about bringing products to market and how you're in fact going to sell them. We've been out doing some surveying on that very topic, looking at the constraints for these small producers getting their products to market, and not only complying with food safety regulations, but also handling the rules of the game as they apply from one sanitarian to the next. As you move from one county to the next to sell your products is also a really substantial issue to them. But please take some time and read the Food Modernization Act and talk to your politicians about it. Yeah.
Is that good? That's good. Thank you. Appreciate it. And I appreciate the fact that you mentioned that to begin with. And a model of that, as many of you know, is the Western Montana Growers Co-op in Western Montana that has started and struggled with this very issue since 2004. But with this new interest and growth has grown to over 40 producers and will reach about $2 million in this next year in sales to local farms and produces. And part of the things that they're doing is really focusing on how do we make farmers in compliance with the Food Modernization Act. So I'm glad to hear that you're studying that and hopefully will become a component of these future presentations because it is a major movement in Western Montana. So just a comment.
Yeah, thanks for the comment, because I agree with you. I think in locally grown agriculture, I think that's the major issue is compliance with Food Modernization Act. I won't go into the details of it right now, but it's really important. I grew up in a family that did some, we handled slaughtered some animals, and we were just a very small producer, and so I'm very, very sensitive to the issues that are surround these small value-added people.
Thank you, George.
And again, George will be with us for the rest of the day. So joining us now, we want to present information and the outlook for Montana's manufacturing industries, including the forest products industry. And to do that, I would like to introduce the Bureau's Director of Forest Industry Research. Would you please welcome Todd Morgan.
Thank you, Chuck, and thank you all for sticking around. I'm going to jump right in to this with a little bit of information about U.S. manufacturing. Several quick points. We've seen significant improvements in manufacturing in the U.S. as a whole over the past couple of years. Employment in U.S. manufacturing hit its low point in 2010, and it's been increasing since then. Worker earnings actually saw its low point in U.S. manufacturing in 2009, and that's up about 12% from them. It's over $970 billion as of 2012. I'd add that gross output from manufacturing in the U.S., along with increased output per worker and income per worker, those are trends that we're seeing in U.S. manufacturing. Now here in Montana, manufacturing employment there, represented by the red or maroon line, it dropped pretty steeply during the recession. And like the U.S., employment in Montana manufacturing has come back up. It's coming back up. It's actually coming up a little bit faster than U.S. Employment. 2012 manufacturing employment was up in Montana about 8% from where we were in 2010, and in the U.S. it's only up about 4%. As you can also see from the graph, neither U.S. manufacturing nor Montana manufacturing employment levels have recovered to where they were before the recession. Now, folks occasionally or even frequently ask, well, why is manufacturing important? Why should we care about it in terms of the state economy? And I'm going to offer several points that refer to the just kind of the raw numbers there on the graph. First, manufacturing employment pays better than average in Montana. Earnings per employee are about 20% higher in manufacturing jobs in the state than they are on average. And really, Montana manufacturing jobs are on par with professional and scientific jobs and many healthcare jobs. I'd also add value added. The gross state product or gross domestic product per employee is about 80% higher than the average for all sectors in manufacturing. So each manufacturing job in Montana adds more value to the economy in terms of value of output than many other or most other sectors in the Montana economy. The value added per employee has also been growing much faster than the overall economy and faster than other sectors. And that is in part because manufacturing really responds to technology. It responds with increasing efficiency, output per worker, and also in higher productivity. Along with these improvements, we know that in manufacturing there's a relatively high employment multiplier. There are roughly 2.5 other jobs created in the Montana economy as a result of each manufacturing job. And along with that goes an earnings multiplier, which is about $1.70 created in other Montana industries for each dollar that Montana manufacturing employees earn. So kind of the short answer as to why should we care about manufacturing, I think it's good bang for the buck, and it's good return per employee. A little bit of information about Montana's manufacturing industry. Over 22,100 workers we estimate for 2013. That includes the self-employed, the sole proprietorships that are a big chunk of Montana's manufacturing. Over $14 billion we estimate in annual sales during 2013. And we estimate about $1.12 billion in labor income for 2013. The pie chart here, you can see the largest manufacturing sectors in the state based on labor income, based on the amount of money that employees make. Chemicals, petroleum refining, and coal products, they're number one. It's about 21% of manufacturing labor income in the state. And that represents about 1,800, almost 1,900 employees in Montana. Now, wood products and furniture, there you can see, is the second largest manufacturing sector in the state as measured by labor income. But I would add that it's the largest sector in Montana manufacturing by number of employees. And then number 3 is food and beverage, one of my favorite categories in all of manufacturing. And there were about 3,900 jobs in food and beverage manufacturing in the state. Now here in Missoula County, we are still among the top 5 counties in manufacturing around the state as measured by employment and by labor income. And we have over 2,100 manufacturing employees in the county, which represents about 3% of the non-farm employment. can see there that labor income in manufacturing is up very slightly in 2012 from where we were in 2011 and in the county. And actually, the earnings piece represents about 4% of non-farm earnings. So 3% of employment, 4% of non-farm earnings, better than average income in manufacturing. I think Paul mentioned this earlier, but Missoula County's manufacturing base was very much impacted by a couple of decades, really, of closures and downsizing in the wood products industry. By sector, you can see here in Missoula County, wood and furniture represents about a quarter of the labor income in the county. Firms like Roseburg, Pyramid Lumber up in Sealy Lake, and then lots of secondary manufacturers and furniture manufacturers around the county. The other durable goods are also an important piece, and this includes things like primary and fabricated metals and some of the other kinds of projects. There's 2 manufacturers out at the old Bonner mill site today that would fall into this other durable goods. Food and beverage is also a significant chunk of what we have in Missoula County in terms of manufacturing, everything from our breweries, meat processing, bottling, and bakeries. And chemicals are another piece, and I would add there that companies like Hexion, Diversified Plastics, Blue Marble, Rivertop Renewables, these are an important piece of the manufacturing picture here in Missoula County. I want to give you a couple examples of some things going on in manufacturing in Montana. During 2013, the Montana Manufacturing Extension Center out of MSU and actually George Haynes, our agricultural speaker, produced a report. They worked with the BBER survey research program and did a survey and some focus groups around the state with small manufacturers. And this is the report. We have copies of it outside available if you'd like to get one. And really examining what are some of the challenges and barriers to manufacturing growth in the state and some of the things that can be done to help overcome those challenges. Also during 2013, the Montana Chamber of Commerce restarted its Montana Manufacturing Council to help provide some advocacy and policy efforts aimed at increasing awareness and improving conditions for Montana manufacturers. A Montana Photonics Industry Alliance was formed to help represent the photonics and optics sector and help those high-tech firms continue their innovative work and job creation. That's a cluster that's really developed in the Bozeman area. Now, a couple of events that are coming up here in 2014. In March 21st and 22nd, there's a Made in Montana food and gift show out at Helena at the fairgrounds. That should be of interest to some folks. And then May 29th, there's a manufacturing and trade day being held in Bozeman. Again, a couple of events going on to help increase awareness of manufacturing in the state and kind of show off some of the products and goods that we produce here. Each year, the Bureau conducts a survey of manufacturers around the state. During 2013, we had 170 respondents. We talked to 170 different manufacturers around the state. Represents about an 80% response rate. And a lot of the outlook in terms of the how optimistic it is comes from what these manufacturers tell us. 2013 brought improvements for many, actually most, manufacturers in the state and for their employees. We saw a net gain of almost 800 jobs, about 780 jobs in Montana manufacturing during 2013. It's about a 3.5% increase in employment. 20% of the firms in the state reported that they had a decreased number of workers, and that was particularly pronounced in the machinery and equipment and also in the chemical and petroleum refining workforce, where they reported more reductions in other sectors. 80% of the firms in Montana that we spoke to said they had no curtailments during the year. 90% said they did not eliminate any of their production capacity. 40% of the firms that we talked to said they had increases in sales and production, and nearly 40% said they also had increases in profits. Half of the firms that we spoke to in the state indicated they made a major capital expenditure during 2013, and that's actually up from 40% of firms that said they made one during 2012. So I think that's another sign that manufacturers in the state are looking at recovery, they're looking at conditions improving, and they want to be ready to meet the market demand. 18% of the firms that we spoke to indicated they had a shortage of workers during 2013, and that was particularly pronounced in the food and beverage manufacturing sector here in the state. Now, improvements have been expected in manufacturing here in Montana since 2010. For 2014, just over 9% of the Montana manufacturers said they expect conditions to be worse than 2013. And nearly half, 47% of the manufacturers we spoke to, expect conditions to be better in 2014. Food and beverage manufacturers are the most optimistic sector within Montana manufacturing. Collectively, there is not a strong indication of hiring among existing manufacturers in the state. A quarter of firms that we talked to said they expect to increase employment in 2014. That's pretty good, a quarter of firms. But 2/3 of firms said they don't expect to make any changes in employment, either up or down. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over a couple of the slides that are in your book, but they're there. If you do have questions, we can talk about them. I'm going to take a look specifically at the forest products industry here in Montana. Firms in wood products are more optimistic than they were last year. Almost 40% of the folks that we talked to in the industry expect 2014 to be better than 2013, and only 6% really think things will get worse. About 1/4 of the firms that we spoke to expect to make a major capital expenditure in 2014 in wood products, and 40% of wood products manufacturers did make a major capital expenditure in 2013. So again, even the wood product sector, I think folks are looking toward better conditions, particularly with new home starts on the rise around the country. Over half of the wood products folks we talked to said they expect to see their prices and gross sales go up, and over 30% expect to see their production and profits increase in 2014. I would add that all of the wood products manufacturers that we surveyed, that's over 30 of them around the state, expect steady or increased employment in 2014. None of them indicated any plans for a major layoff this year. Overall, Montana's forest industry is still down about 400 jobs from where we were in 2009, and that's roughly equivalent to the number of people that were employed at Smurfit Stone Container. So while the other sectors, the sawmills, log homes, forestry, logging, have kind of gone down and come back up a little bit, that paper sector is where we're still short on some employment. U.S. home building is expected to increase in 2014. Forecasters are predicting that we'll see about 1.1 million new homes built or started in the U.S. in 2014, increasing to 1.4, 1.5 million by 2015. Of course, more home building leads directly to more wood products consumption. So markets for wood products are expected to improve. But we do have international demand from the Chinese in particular, and Canadian competition on the production side, along with some more tendency towards just-in-time purchasing and mills restarting or adding shifts that are going to follow along with the housing recovery. And this is going to probably create some volatility in wood product prices throughout the year. Here in Montana, the volume of output and the value of sales from Montana's wood products producers are expected to increase. More mills are moving closer to full-time, either adding shifts or lengthening shifts. And this should translate into some more employment and also improved worker earnings in the wood product sector. Going forward, timber availability. And timber availability has two faces that are going to be a challenge for Montana's wood products industry. One is on the supply side, the amount of public land and private land timber that's available is going to be sold. And also on the logging and hauling side, getting the logs out of the forest and to the mill. There are going to be possibly some growing pains, some re-expansion in that sector, and these could prove to be challenges for Montana's wood products industry as they try to keep up with the new market or improving market demand that we're going to see in the next couple of years. Turning back to the broader manufacturing picture in the state, I want to take a look at kind of the outlooks for manufacturing by the different cities, different regions around the state. Most regions of the state are expecting 2014 to be better than 2013. You can see all of the lines there end above that 0.5 threshold, which indicate a positive outlook for the year. Billings and Great Falls areas have slightly lower predictions or outlooks than last year, but still all the regions are positive. Kalispell area manufacturers were the most positive in their outlook for 2014. You can see that top orange line is quite a bit above all the others. Bozeman area firms have a much improved outlook from just last year in terms of the manufacturers, and the Butte area, which has typically been kind of right on the fence, 50-50 in terms of positive versus maybe not so positive. They've had a much improved outlook going into 2014 as well. Of course, here in the Missoula area, manufacturers in Missoula, Andhra Valley County, and Mineral, all three counties combined, the outlook is on par with the state, and it's actually a bit better than it was last year, you can see from the graph. A quarter of the manufacturers in Missoula County expect to increase employment in 2014. I think that's a bit of good news for folks. Only 7% of the manufacturers that we spoke to in this area said they had expect to see a decrease in their employment levels. Over 95% of the firms that we talked to indicated they are making plans, or they do have plans for growth over the next few years, growth and/or expansion. Finding qualified, skilled workers is an issue for many of the manufacturing firms here in the Missoula area, also statewide. Access to capital is also one that's been noted by several of the firms as a major challenge that they've faced in trying to expand. Over 30% of the manufacturing firms that we talked to in this area have 50-plus employees. So, of course, like elsewhere in the state, health care, health insurance costs, and worker comp issues are going to be top concerns for the manufacturers here. The overall outlook for manufacturing in Montana, generally, across most sectors and most regions of the state, the outlook is positive. Many firms have had 2 to 3 good years, and I expect 2014 to be better than 2013. They do expect to see continued improvements in business conditions, production levels, sales values, prices they get for their products. Profits are all expected to increase. And this is going to lead to what we anticipate to be modest growth in manufacturing employment and in worker earnings in the next year. And while health insurance and worker comp rates continue to lead the issues that manufacturers tell us are of concern to them, many sectors in different locations around the state have other issues that rise to the top. Raw material availability, the prices of raw materials, finding qualified workers is an issue for a lot of manufacturing firms, particularly in central and eastern Montana, that have to compete with the Bakken for some skilled labor, pipe fitting, welding, that kind of thing. And concerns, of course, about regulation and the general economic recovery, the legs of the recovery that we're seeing are of interest and concern to a lot of manufacturers. With that, I appreciate your time and be glad to take some questions.
Questions for Todd? Comments? Manufacturing and forest products. Won't give you many chances. If not, thank you, Todd.
Great, thank you.
As we get back to our look at industries that are important within the state of Montana, we are pleased to take a look at Montana and Missoula's housing and real estate markets. And to do that, we have with us the director of the Center for Applied Economic Research at Montana State University, Billings. Would you please welcome Scott Rickard?
Thank you, Chuck. And I want to say first, thank you to the Bureau of Business and Economic Research for asking me to participate on the tour talking about the housing market, residential real estate. I also want to thank my home institution, Montana State University, Billings, for supporting the center, basically paying for me to be here to talk. And I want to thank all of you for being out here listening to me talk about the housing market. First, let's look at the national picture just briefly. Basically, the year-over-year estimates, we're looking at sales and prices both increasing, and mainly Montana is following the U.S. in this, and a little bit lower in terms of the estimated price increase, but not too much. Across the U.S., basically, we saw 30% cash, all cash buyers. That's down a little bit from the previous year. And why that's interesting is all cash buyers, of course, are either institutional investors or people who have managed to sell their existing home and they're trading down such that they can afford all cash. Also, we're 23% first-time buyers. That's great because, to become a repeat buyer, you have to be a first-time buyer. And owning a home is one of the best predictors that you will purchase another home in the future. Now, just a couple of words about foreclosures. Again, this was an issue, and it continues to be, but not nearly as much as it was. Looking at the percentage of the sales that would be considered distressed, U.S. and Montana both, about the same, but they are dropping. So we're seeing that backlog is getting to the market, and it's getting sold. That's off the grid now. The main thing is negative equity. It's really interesting how much lower the percentages of homeowners with mortgages that are underwater in Montana as opposed to the U.S. and that 4% compared to 13%. And 90-day delinquencies, actually in Montana right now, it's fewer than 2%. It's 1.9% of the homes with mortgages are currently 90-day delinquent or more. Now, several of these national firms also break it down to a Montana level, and looking at this index, major market index, they've got indices broken down for 3 of Montana's major areas. And you see that, basically, based on these indices, they're seeing rises in the index, therefore increases in price since 2011. But still, we're looking at, for example, Missoula, it's down, but it has not recovered from the 2008 levels. Now, this is great, I like that, but I'm always a little concerned about these national ones, because even the ones with the larger sample sizes, by the time you drill down to how many observations Montana for a particular market area, the sample size gets smaller. So for that, there are additional data sources available. And the main one is data that I have the privilege of being able to utilize from the MLS systems. The center works with the Montana Association of Realtors and the real estate MLS systems around the state to get this information and provide it. This graph of median prices, again, note the scale. I started at 100,000 at the bottom, just so we can accentuate the fact that you do see that for Gallatin, you see for Flathead, there was a minimum there. 2011 prices declined, and now, but then from 2011, just about all the areas, we're seeing an increase in median price. Now, what are these median prices? Now, remember, we do medians instead of averages and follow that, because depending upon how many of those expensive homes and what share they are of your overall sales year to year, averages can move around a lot. It doesn't take many $1 million sales to really throw an average around and change in that. So median prices just reduce that influence. But basically, we're looking Yellowstone, Lewis and Clark, Flathead, Missoula, all kind of clustered around median prices in 2013, around $210,000. Specifically, then you've got down below there with Silverbow, 118, very, relatively speaking, very low, and the very modest prices there. And whereas Flathead, almost 280 for median price. Oh, excuse me, that's not Flathead, that's Gallatin. Excuse me, Bozeman, 280. Yeah, they're the highest everywhere. Missoula, we saw 1,500 sales in 2013. That was up. Average price $261,000 as opposed to that median. Again, showing you that on the high end there was some outliers there. Now this tries to distill 2012, 2013, what we saw in terms of growth. The farther out to your right you get, that means the greater the percentage increase in sales for this market. Oh, I'm sorry, you're not seeing this in the handouts because I've drastically changed. I apologize. The updated ones will be available. Sorry. But anyhow, looking at the graph, going higher up, so higher up, a greater increase, larger the percentage increase in the percentage or in the median price, right? And the size of the bubble is the total value of transactions that took place in 2013. So basically, we see Cascade, Missoula counties, we saw more of an increase in the number of transactions than we did an increase in prices. Whereas for these other market areas, it was more proportional. Cascade and Lewis and Clark counties each accounted for about $190 million in residential real estate transaction sales, 2013. Yellowstone was $315 million in sales. And moving up from there, Missoula, $390 million in sales in 2013. And all the way at the top, you've got Gallatin, Flathead, $440 or $450 million in residential real estate transactions. All totaling, just these market areas represent over $2 billion in real estate sales, residential, 2013. Now also, thanks to having this more detailed data, we can look at the trend in sales month to month. I just have 4 of the market areas shown here, just all at the common, starting at the same common point. I've got different degrees, how many months, how many years worth for different market areas. But what you can see clearly is the trend is increasing, the month-to-month trend. The reason I wanted to look at that is the last couple of weeks we see Wall Street Journal articles talking about, well, is there deceleration? Our price, are we seeing a deceleration in price month to month? I'm not capturing that. I'm not seeing that yet. Maybe, but I'm not seeing it yet. And also, what is the proper market area? The proper time frame? Do we really think that every month is this every month? Do we see this a certain percentage of people saying, "Do I buy or don't I?" In some ways, I think that's almost over trying to fit the data year to year, and how many people try to buy year to year is probably good enough for us. One other thing is I mentioned before, Montana Building Industry Association building permits. Looking at that, that's a month-to-month, another month-to-month estimate there. And that black line is a 3-month moving average. Again, we see a clear increase in the building permits. Now, one issue I have in Montana is right now I'm not having great luck in seeing how the increase in permits tracks to the increase in sales, even of, relatively speaking, new homes. I believe what I'm seeing there is we do not yet have a really strong return to the spec sale, to the spec market, as in the majority of these building permits that are actually turned into single-family homes or multifamily. These were built by people who have already purchased them, so they never see the MLS system. And again, one last thing I like to do is, what we're doing here is we're looking at sales and trying to say what the sales data tell us about the underlying values. This becomes, increasingly important when we're looking at what's coming up this year, is that residential reappraisal and property reappraisal, where you look at the data, you look at how sales are tracking and what people are buying and willing to spend. How does that information translate into what is, the value of the vast majority of homes that are not on the market? And these are different characteristics that I try to adjust for, of course. Difference in square feet, the characteristics, just as a hint, I've noticed if you can convince your realtor to list your property as a cabin, it seems to be worth a whole lot of money. Age is a strong predictor, especially effective age. It's very interesting to see how the premium people are willing to pay for new. And then lot size and location. Of course, location. But it's even amazing to me how, when I look at it, it's differences between cities, differences between zip code, differences between market areas, how much of that can predict and drive the underlying price. So looking at that, I run this model. I run these models with several different data sets. I don't have the same level of disaggregation for looking at it one way or another. So in some of these, I'm looking at a data set that has information all the way back to 2008, but not the same level of detail. I've got more detailed information like 2011 and on. So I'm just presenting significant findings. In general, what I was seeing is, first note how this is using this model-based, adjusting underlying values. I'm seeing about what they showed or showing from the overall data. You're looking at Gallatin increased 13% in underlying values, my estimation, between 2010, but still they're 6% below their 2008 levels. Flathead, again, we're seeing a decent growth, to basic 14% increase underlying values, 2011 to 13. Unfortunately, I didn't have sufficient data to go back to 2008 and do a similar analysis with the other. I suspect we would probably see the same thing, that there was an underlying decline and then an increase. Now, Missoula is the interesting one, and they are a little contrary to what I was seeing elsewhere at looking underlying values. When I look at, I found no significant difference between 2011 and 2012, but I do see between 2011 and 2013, 3% decrease in the underlying value as measured in a quality adjusted price per square foot. Now, it doesn't mean that the market is not improving. Of course it is improving. We're seeing that in increased price, median price increases in the number of transactions. What it could be is just a difference in the characteristics and what is selling. Relatively speaking, looking at the data, I'm seeing that price per transaction did not increase as much as such things as square feet. So people were willing to spend more, but they were getting even more for more bang for the buck. So, in that. Overall outlook for 2014. Everything I've talked about there, we're seeing, I'm not seeing any real signs that this is going to suddenly peter out. We've got market conditions continuing to grow. We've got price and quantity going up in most of these, most all of the areas, and multiply those together, you've got total volumes increasing. We're seeing in, construction, based on permits, it was 4,000 permits, and with the growth rate, half the growth rate, we're still talking about better than a 10 to 15% growth in building permits. And another thing about the permits is it's about 4,000 permits last year. Well, we were as high as 6,000 permits for several years in the middle of the 2010s, right? But then we dropped to 2,500 or so, like 2009. So there is still room for increase. And last, I do want to mention one other thing about the coming reappraisal cycle for residential. Those of you who've lived here for a while can remember almost the sticker shock the last time we had a reappraisal, where we saw some areas growing, between 2002 and 2008, it's appreciably more. Gallatin Lake, Flathead counties on average about 66% increase in the appraised value, right? And then compared to, we had the Silverbow, Cascade, Yellowstone down there more like the 40-some%. Well, then there's later information. We've got this information now from revenue talking about total change in median price for these different market areas. And let's just say that is somewhat proportional or somewhat representative of what the appraised values are going to look like. So we have this rapid run up for some counties versus others. You add these two together, and what we see is what I would consider a mean revision, whereas some of these counties that experienced the most drastic increase the previous cycle likely will see less increase, to the extent that overall, over the 10-year period of time, the overall property tax appraised value increase, and I'm assuming property tax will be proportional to that, will be more adjusted back to where they were a decade or more ago. That doesn't mean now that we're not going to see some systematic shifts, whereas relatively speaking, let's say Yellowstone County is probably going to pick up a greater share of overall property taxation than it did after the last, because relatively speaking, they will be gaining compared to some of these other counties. With that, I want to thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to take questions and try to answer them.
Questions for Scott? Housing and real estate. Questions, comments?
I guess I'm concerned about all the new construction when I don't see any new jobs coming around to fill all these homes and all these apartment complexes. I just was wondering, how do we survive then when you overbuild and then prices drop again if another downturn occurs?
So the question has to do with the relative imbalance between what you see, what you believe in terms of additional units as to the lack of increase relative to the number of jobs. Yeah, it's a very good question. I believe we're seeing something similar in Billings. The apartments are a little more difficult to capture data on because they're not considered residential as much. And one thing is we have to remember who is, literally there is a buyer. Someone has paid to build these units, and they're taking the chance that there will be the people to occupy them. Now we know that new construction was depressed for a number of years, and household formation was too. So we have this backlog, and I'm just wondering how these 20-somethings, are they going to decide to own a home? If there is not a correction, if there is not some sort of ramp up in jobs, relatively speaking, then we could see another case where we've got additional people who have overbuilt, and that's how the market works. Overbuilt, they will not make the money that they put into it. The word will get out. There will be less construction of new in the future. I'm also a little concerned of looking at the data. People are really willing to pay a premium for new right now. That doesn't bode well for the homes, the existing homes, especially the ones that are past the median in terms of age. It's striking the difference in median age effective age across the region. We've got a Cascade, we've got Silverbow, the median average age, or the average age 50 years. Whereas you look at Gallatin, for certain classes of homes, average age is more like 11 or 12 years for what's selling. So that just talks about both, what is selling and how different it can be across one market area to another. Thank you.